Holy moly, movies are super long these days. And no, I don't think it's a patience thing. I'm actually an extremely patient person.
What the?
What the?
What the? What the?
What the? Hello and welcome to What the Film. I'm your host Nathaniel. Let's get into it. You know how some movies are too long? Some movies are too short, and other movies are just right. Well, today we'll be talking about the first kind, because movies have gotten just so goddamn long. And look, if it was only the good ones that were long, maybe I'd be okay with it. But somehow, the bad ones are also getting longer? Someone pointed out how easy it is to be just another guy making fun of Netflix. And to that I say, yeah, Netflix has made it really easy to make fun of them. What do you want from me? I'm gonna go over the low-hanging fruit sometimes. I have to make like 50 of these a year. But to be fair, while Netflix does make a lot of bad movies, they're also probably responsible for the death of physical media. And they're the leading perpetrators in the overvaluation of streaming services, leading to the bursting of the streaming bubble. But hey, I'm glad someone out there is looking out for the little guys, like Netflix. Back to long movies. In today's episode, we'll be taking a look at just how long is long, and which movies I'm picking on for being so long. We'll also take a look at when this started to become a trend in the first place, and we'll see if this is even actually a bad thing. Lastly, we'll explore why this is probably a bad thing. If this were an overly long movie, now would be the time for something like a music montage. Unfortunately, we couldn't afford the rights to any music. So now, please enjoy some stock footage set to the sound of children laughing in slow motion. I didn't approve. Just roll the next segment. What do I mean when I say long? Long can mean different things to different people. It's not like there's a standard definition. My producer informed me that, like with most words, long does have a standard definition. However, when we looked it up in the context in which we're using it, we found lasting or taking a great amount of time, which really just leads us right back to where we started, which is the subjectivity of long. God damn, I hate my producer. Thought I fired you, Dave. You are the standard definition of the worst. So how long is too long? Well, let's establish some baselines here. Since we're talking Hollywood movies, we'll use some Hollywood guidelines. According to the Academy, the institution behind the Oscars, a short film cannot exceed 40 minutes. Therefore, a feature-length film is anything longer than 40 minutes. According to the Screen Actors Guild, the Actors Union, a feature-length film is anything greater than 60 minutes. Already, with just these two figures, it's pretty crazy that movies are as long as they are. But what is the actual average running time of a feature-length film? That's the real question, isn't it? You see, personally, anecdotally, intuitively, I would say that pre-2000s, the average running time of a feature-length film was about 90 minutes, blockbusters and outliers aside. But since the year 2000, I would say the average running time was about 2 hours. But what does the data say? Well, there's certainly a lot of talk of this concept on the internet, and there have been quite a few studies, each with unique approaches to gathering and analyzing their respective data sets. Ugh. Enough school talk, let's skip to the end. While the studies did somehow have very differing conclusions, the data does support the idea that pre-2000, there were considerably more 90-minute or less movies and not as many 2-hour-plus movies. But then post-2000, especially 2010, there was a bit of a shift, and suddenly there are way more 2-hour-plus movies and not as many 90-minute or less movies. So with what Hollywood defines as feature length, compared to what Hollywood delivers as feature length, I would say only somewhat arbitrarily that anything over 2 hours long is too long. Period. It is my expert opinion that the average movie should not exceed 2 hours. However, there are some important exceptions that need to be made, and I don't mean exceptions for movies that are over 2 hours long. I mean it in the other direction. There are some movies that I would consider too long if they even come close to approaching 2 hours in length. I am sure people will disagree with what I'm about to say and point to the few exceptions to somehow prove me wrong, but I don't think your average comedy should come close to 2 hours in length, and it definitely shouldn't be longer. Obviously, the same applies to rom-coms. I don't think the drama of the rom justifies the com going on longer than it should. Also, kids' movies? How is it that kids' movies are so long? I get that parents want some time where the kids' focus isn't on the parents. I mean, kids are the worst. Right, Dad? But who are we kidding? Your kids aren't locking in for 2 hours, and don't lie to me and say that they are. I've made the mistake of going to a Pixar film on opening weekend, and I haven't heard so many immature voices talking over each other since the last time I tried to listen to an improv podcast. Now that you have a better idea of what I mean when I refer to movies that are too long, we can discuss why I think movies are getting so long. Or too long. So too long. Long, 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 long. If we can move forward accepting the premise that movies are longer and there are more movies that are too long, the question remains, why? Why must every film be an epic tale? Why has a fun trip to the movies gone from a quick night out to a full-on sleepover at the theater? Why must I download an app that lets me know when it's safe to go to the bathroom because we're 2 hours in and I've chugged 48 ounces of the worst soda imaginable? As someone who has been lucky enough to write and direct a few short films, I can confidently say that a big part of the problem is ego. And yes, I am aware that there are some movies that are on the longer side where their use of length is inoffensive. Everything in there supports the story or the telling of the story. But in stark contrast to that are movies where everything feels, for a lack of a better word, indulgent. I mention my credentials as a filmmaker to add some measure of value to my thoughts and opinions. But you don't have to be a writer to know when you're looking at a scene that could have stayed on the cutting room floor. If you're not an aging film nerd, cutting room floor refers to a time when movies were shot on film, and they were actually edited by hand, with someone cutting out the part of the movie they didn't want and taping together the new edit. The part that they didn't want would fall to the floor. Now, if it still had some value, whether that was narrative or visual, you would pick it up. But if it didn't, you would leave it on the cutting room floor. Any hoozles, ego definitely is a major contributing factor to all these overly long films. Writers and directors alike like to keep in all their secondary and tertiary story beats, or that thing where a movie feels like it could have ended, but somehow they have more story to tell. And this is why indulgent feels like the appropriate word. And there are definitely some filmmakers out there who indulge in this length because they think that it adds a sense of gravitas or seriousness to their movies. In reality, if they had any confidence in their storytelling abilities, they would be a bit more succinct. But they put every thought they have up on the screen, almost as if to shield themselves from criticism in some weird way, as if to say, how could you possibly have a problem with my movie? It contains all the words I know. But as much as I blame ego and impotent storytelling, I also have to blame studios. Dumb, dumb studios. Sorry, I'm just leaning into it at this point. But I would like to think that we all know now, post-strike, that the creatives are the writers and the working actors, etc., etc. And the people in the studios and the C-suite positions all went to business school. And you could see how that disconnect from business to creative could lead to studios giving some bad notes on films. How can studio notes lead to long movies? Well, from what I can gather from all the countless hours of YouTube and podcast interviews with filmmakers I've listened to, studios tend to add. They'll give you notes on your third act and say that you need to build it out more. They'll give you notes on the romance part of the story and say it's a little weak and you need to write it out more. They'll give you notes on the ending and say that the solving of the mystery won't make sense to a lot of people, so you need to spell it out more. Sure, there are examples of studios giving the note to take something out of a movie, but you see, it's far easier for a filmmaker to justify wanting to keep something in because it supports the story than it is for a filmmaker to justify keeping something out that the studio wants in there. You don't piss off the studio. Not only are they signing your paycheck, but they're also signing the paycheck of the hundreds of people who work cast and crew. And let's face it, studios don't give a about how long movies are directly. They only care how much it costs to make the movie. If they thought they could make $1 billion spitting out a bunch of 90-minute cheaply made movies, they'd do that. If they thought they could make $1 billion spitting out a trilogy of epic sagas, they'd do that too. All that to say, studios aren't helping any. And all these self-proclaimed auteurs aren't helping any either. So maybe it's time we just embrace the madness? Maybe it's not so bad that so many movies are as long as they are. I understand my tone up to this point has had real disappointed dad energy, but hey, what are you doing with your time? Rewatching The Office again? You really gotta stop doing that. You just get angrier and angrier every time you get to the last season. And that sends you down this weird How I Met Your Mother tangent. And the next thing you know, you're working on an essay for a new YouTube show about how writing a satisfying ending for a TV show is impossible. But back to long movies. Perhaps it's only fair that these movies are so long. More bang for our buck. It's not like a traditional outing to the theater is a cheap experience, and I'm speaking as an individual. I can't even imagine what it's like to go as a family, mostly because I have zero reference point, right, Dad? Why did you leave, you son of a bitch? Now you might be asking, well, how does the more bang for your buck concept apply to the streaming movies? And to that I say, la 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 la, I can't hear you. La la. Can't hear you. I don't have an exact answer for that. My best guess is that the filmmakers feel obliged to deliver something beefy because the streaming studios have thrown an absolutely stupid amount of money at them. Also, longer movies are the norm in some cultures, or at least used to be. The cinema of India used to be known for consistently releasing longer movies. But interestingly enough, India has suffered the inverse of our trend, and their movies used to be much longer in the 70s and 80s. Now, some people will blame the shortening of film length on the shortening of attention spans, but anybody who has spent any amount of time browsing YouTube knows that's probably not the case. The truth is, someone probably just figured out that a shorter film is cheaper to make. But there are still plenty of longer Bollywood films being made. Also, at least the longer Indian films have the decency of having intermissions. Despite what some filmmakers may think, most movies that would warrant having an intermission would not suffer for having one. If that were the case, intermissions wouldn't have survived the theater setting. But you never hear anyone say, boy, I really liked Wicked. I just wish there wasn't a break in the middle for me to collect my thoughts for 2 goddamn seconds. If I'm looking at the movie run times at my local theater, I might balk at 2 hours and 45 minutes. But if I see that there's an intermission in there, I might just be more intrigued. Suddenly it's an event, and you didn't even have to sell me some perverse popcorn bucket. Honestly, those all sound like solid arguments for longer movies being pretty good. So yeah, maybe it's not such a bad thing. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, despite what you may have inferred from my face, voice, and general demeanor, but all these long movies are kinda sorta fucking up the entire film industry. And if that sounds extreme, to be fair, I said kinda sorta. But before I crack into all that, let's discuss audiences. I am not one of those people that thinks that audiences don't have the attention span for long movies. I just think they don't want that from their movies. People don't expect their movie-going experience to mirror a night out at the theater. A 90-minute movie plus driving and concessions and trailers and now commercials, and suddenly I've committed 3 hours of my life to a 90-minute movie? A 3-hour movie is such a time commitment, I feel like I have to board my dog and do some estate planning. Also, do filmmakers not know that we have to sit through half an hour of commercials? And sometimes those commercials are for the very theater you're already sitting in, which feels like a slap in the face, like somehow the theater knows that my time on this earthly plane is finite, but I'm still willing to sit through a commercial for AMC while inside an AMC. Let's not forget that not every movie needs to be 2 hours plus. Not every film supports having that kind of production. Not every film can afford that kind of production. Which brings me to longer movies. Fuck the film industry. Do you remember the term indie film? It used to be a lot more common 30 plus years ago. It refers to movies that were made without the support of a major studio. a task that is far more difficult to accomplish today, what with all the popular small studios being owned by or having a partner deal with the major studios. Back when indie films thrived, it was more common for movies to be about 90 minutes long. This worked in the indie film's favor because, the shorter the movie, the less expensive it is to make. Indie films can focus on standing out by having a really compelling cast or unique one-of-a-kind story. Independent filmmakers can innovate in Hollywood. But now imagine a theatrical landscape where all the movies are 2 hours plus. How does the independent filmmaker's 80-minute movie compete with 120 minutes? 80 compared to 90 is a coin toss, but 80 compared to 120 is a 33% loss in your investment of a film ticket if you choose 80. Where does this leave independent filmmakers? Where will all the innovation come from? How do we get to hear fresh stories from new voices? It seems like the only people that get to make movies are the people that can really afford to make movies. So much talky talk, let's sum it up nicely. In short, the elongification of movies does a disservice to the film industry by devaluing shorter, more affordable films and thus making it harder for innovative voices to break into the industry and breathe some much-needed new life into Hollywood filmmaking. Is there an even shorter version? Just in case that was hard to follow or I wasn't paying attention. Hollywood will make stale movies if they keep making all these long movies. And if that seems like a stretch, please tell me how many great movies have come out in 2024 now that we're already halfway through it. Oh, you're already done counting? Huh. Seems like Hollywood might already be getting kind of stale. I think movies are getting longer. Maybe they're not. Maybe it's a perception thing. There are more movies these days. That's just a fact. So it stands to reason there'd be more long movies. But I stand by the fact that not all these movies need so much length. And I don't think it's a coincidence that independent films aren't as prominent as they used to be. But maybe that's a good thing. I don't think I could stomach a 50-year-old Zach Braff acting all twee while an Elliott Smith song plays in the background.
Love, 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 love.
Movies are weird.